Somewhere in a drawer, in an old wallet, or on a card you haven't looked at in years, there's a letter and maybe a plus or minus sign. A, B, A, B, O. You probably know yours, and you probably think of it the way you think of your shoe size. A fact about you, filed away, useful maybe once, if ever, in an emergency. Here's what almost nobody tells you. That letter has been quietly studied for decades. Researchers following tens of thousands of people, some for more than 20 years, have found real, measurable links between blood type and the things you actually worry about at this stage of life. Heart disease, dangerous blood clots, certain cancers, even your memory. Not as a guarantee, not as fate, as a clue, the same kind of clue your doctor already uses when checking your cholesterol or your blood pressure. One more piece of the picture. By the end of this video, you'll understand what your own blood type may be quietly telling you. And, this matters more, exactly what you can do about it, no matter what letter is on that card. And the seventh fact on this list actually surprised the researchers who found it. But to understand why, you first need to know what your blood type really is. So what is a blood type, really? Not the textbook answer, the actual practical one. Every red blood cell in your body has tiny markers on its surface, almost like a badge it wears. Those markers are built from a combination of genes passed down from both of your parents, the same way your eye color was decided long before you were born. Depending on which combination you inherited, you end up with type A, type B, type AB, or type O. For most of your life, that badge probably only mattered in one context, a transfusion where doctors need your blood to match. But here's the part that rarely gets explained. That same badge doesn't just sit quietly on the surface of your cells. It interacts with the rest of your body in ways researchers are still mapping out. How easily your blood clots, how your immune system recognizes certain threats, even how blood cells behave against the walls of your blood vessels. Think of it less like a label and more like an ID badge that different systems in your body respond to differently. Your clotting proteins read it one way, your immune system reads it another. Now, before this starts to sound alarming, here's the reassurance worth holding on to through the rest of this video. When researchers say a blood type carries higher risk, they don't mean it causes a condition, and they certainly don't mean it predicts your future. They mean that across huge populations, tens of thousands of people, the odds shift slightly. It's the same kind of shift you'd see with family history, or simply getting older. A nudge, not a verdict. And type O, by the way, is the most common blood type out there. A B is the rarest, only about 4% of people. With that foundation in place, let's start with the fact most people have actually heard a whisper of, but never really understood, blood type and heart disease. Let's start with the fact that carries the most weight, because it comes from one of the largest studies ever done on this subject. Researchers at the Harvard School of Public Health, led by Dr. Lucci, pulled data from two long-running studies that followed roughly 89,000 adults for close to 20 years. That's not a small sample size you can wave away. That's 2 decades of real people, real checkups, real outcomes. What they found was this. Compared to people with type O blood, those with type A had a modestly higher risk of developing coronary heart disease. Type B, a little higher still. And type AB, the rarest type, showed the largest difference, with roughly a fifth again as much risk as type O. Here's the detail that made researchers sit up. This pattern held even after they accounted for the usual suspects: cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure. In other words, blood type wasn't just standing in for those other risk factors. It appeared to be contributing something of its own. Imagine 2 neighbors, both 65, both walking the same route every morning, eating roughly the same meals, seeing the same doctor for the same yearly checkup. On paper, their risk factors look nearly identical. The only real difference between them is the letter on their blood type card. According to this research, that single difference could still be quietly shifting their odds. That's an unsettling thought at first, until you hear how Dr. Key himself framed it. He didn't suggest panic. He suggested perspective. Blood type, he said, is worth knowing the same way you know your cholesterol number. Not something to fear, something to factor in. That framing matters because it tells you exactly how to hold this information. You don't need to lie awake wondering about a letter you can't change. You simply add it to the list of things you and your doctor already track. One more piece of context sitting alongside the numbers you already know. And heart disease, as it turns out, isn't the only cardiovascular concern tied to blood type. There's a second, closely related risk, one that surprises even more people once they understand where it comes from. That heart disease finding leads naturally to a question: why would a blood type badge have anything to do with your heart at all? The answer takes us straight into your bloodstream itself and into the second fact on this list. Research has found that people with non-O blood types AB and AB face a notably higher likelihood of developing dangerous blood clots, conditions like deep vein thrombosis, compared to people with type O. In some studies, that difference has been striking, somewhere in the range of 60 to 80% higher. Here's the why, and it connects directly back to what you just heard. Certain blood types are associated with higher circulating levels of specific clotting-related proteins. In plain terms, the blood itself runs slightly stickier on average. That's not a flaw or a defect. It's simply a biological tendency. But it's also very likely part of the same thread running through the heart disease finding. It's not a coincidence that the blood types with higher clotting tendency are the same ones showing higher cardiovascular risk. It's the same underlying mechanism showing up in two different places. Now, why does this matter specifically for you at this stage of life? Because clot risk doesn't start with blood type E, it starts with age. It rises with reduced mobility, with certain medications, with long stretches of sitting still, like on a flight or a long car ride. Those are the factors your doctor already watches for. Blood type simply sits on top of them as one more layer, a layer you can't change, but one that makes the layers you can change a little more worth paying attention to. So think of it this way. If you already know you're someone who needs to get up and move during a long trip, or stay ahead of hydration, or watch your legs for unusual swelling, that advice matters a little more if your blood type happens to be A, B, or AB. Not because you're in danger, because you now understand exactly why that advice exists. So far, we've covered the heart and the blood itself. But blood type's fingerprints show up somewhere else many people would never expect, in cancer risk. Now we move from the heart into territory most people never expect a blood type to touch at all, the digestive system, and specifically cancer. Multiple observational studies have found that people with type A blood show a higher likelihood of developing stomach or gastric cancer compared to other blood types. Researchers have a proposed explanation, though it's one they're still refining. Certain blood group markers may change how the lining of the stomach interacts with long-term bacterial infection, particularly a common bacteria called H. pylori, or with dietary irritants that build up over decades. It's an association, not a settled cause and effect, but it's a consistent enough pattern that it's shown up across more than one study. Now, if you have type A blood, take a breath before that sinks in too heavily, because here's where the story becomes more balanced than it first appears. Type O, the blood type linked to somewhat lower cardiovascular and cancer risk in earlier findings, isn't free of trade-offs either. Type O has been associated with a higher likelihood of developing peptic ulcers. So the very blood type that seems to catch a break in one area ends up carrying its own vulnerability in another. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it reveals something important about all 7 of these facts. No blood type is the winning type. There isn't a version of this list where one letter gets to feel safe and the others don't. Type A carries one trade-off. Type O carries a different one. Every blood type, it seems, trades a little protection in one area for a little exposure in another. That's not a comforting platitude. It's simply what the research shows. And it matters because it means this video isn't building toward a scary conclusion about the bad blood types. It's building toward a fuller, more honest picture, one where understanding your own trade-offs is more useful than worrying about who has it worse. Stomach cancer isn't the only cancer connection researchers have found either. There's one other cancer where the difference between blood types shows up even more sharply, and it's worth understanding exactly what that difference means. This next connection has actually been observed for decades, long before researchers understood why it was happening. Scientists noticed years ago that pancreatic cancer seemed to show up more often in people with certain blood types. For a long time, that observation sat there, unexplained, almost like a loose thread nobody had pulled yet. More recently, researchers connected to institutions like Dana-Farber Cancer Institute used modern genetic and epidemiological methods to confirm that the pattern was real. Compared to type O, other blood types have shown a meaningfully higher relative risk of developing pancreatic cancer, though the exact size of that difference shifts somewhat from study to study. Now, this is a fact that deserves a little extra care, because pancreatic cancer isn't something people casually discuss, and it's easy for a statistic like this to land harder than it should. So let's put it in proportion. Pancreatic cancer remains, overall, an uncommon disease, and blood type is genuinely one of the smaller pieces of the puzzle. The factors that matter far more are the ones you may already know about: smoking, chronic pancreatitis, obesity, and family history. Those carry far greater weight than the letter on your blood type card ever will. So hold this fact the way it's meant to be held, not as a reason to worry, but as a reason to be aware, to know that if pancreatic cancer runs in your family, or if other risk factors already apply to you, this is simply one more thread woven into that picture, not a new source of alarm on its own. And here's where it gets interesting. If blood type can raise your risk in these areas, the heart, the blood itself, certain cancers, it's fair to ask the opposite question too. Does blood type ever lower a risk instead? The answer takes us back millions of years to a trade-off written into your biology long before modern medicine ever existed. Let's shift gears for a moment, because this next fact isn't about risk at all. It's about something that goes back millions of years, long before hospitals, blood tests, or even written history. Researchers studying the global distribution of blood types noticed something curious. Type O appears far more often in regions of the world that historically had high rates of malaria. That's not a coincidence. Evolutionary biologists and public health researchers have found that type O blood is associated with a real degree of protection against severe malaria infection. In places where malaria was once one of the deadliest threats a person could face, carrying type O blood may have quietly improved someone's odds of survival, generation after generation. Think about what that means. A trait sitting quietly in your blood today may exist, at least in part, because it helped an ancestor of yours survive a threat that barely crosses your mind now. But here's the twist, and it circles right back to something you already learned. That same type O blood, protective against malaria, is the same blood type linked to a higher likelihood of peptic ulcers. Protective in one setting, vulnerable in another. It's the evolutionary version of the trade-off you saw with cancer risk a few minutes ago. Proof that this pattern isn't a coincidence. It's simply how biology tends to work. Nothing is protective everywhere. Nothing is risky everywhere either. So no, there isn't a winning blood type hiding somewhere in this list, just waiting to be revealed. There's only ever a different set of trade-offs, shaped by history, environment, and biology, working together long before any of us were born. And that evolutionary story is fascinating on its own. But it also hints at something researchers have only recently connected: a link between blood type and the body's immune and inflammatory responses more broadly, one that shows up in some far less obvious places. Before we get to the final fact on this list, it's worth pausing to make an important distinction. One that separates a genuinely careful health video from the kind of content that just tells you what sounds interesting. Beyond heart disease, clotting, and the specific cancers we've already covered, researchers have also explored whether blood type connects to broader patterns in the body. Things like general inflammation, metabolic function, and even certain autoimmune-related tendencies. Some preliminary research has looked at possible differences in diabetes-related risk across blood types, for example. Here's the honest part. The findings you heard earlier, heart disease, blood clots, the cancer associations, come from very large studies, tracking tens of thousands of people, often replicated across multiple research groups. This next layer isn't quite there yet. The research into inflammation, metabolism, and autoimmune patterns is more mixed. Some studies find a connection. Others find something weaker or don't find much at all. It's an area researchers are still actively working through, not one where the evidence has settled into a clear, consistent picture. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Not every claim you'll come across about blood type carries the same weight. Some rest on decades of large-scale research. Others are still early, still being tested, still waiting for more data to confirm or contradict them. Knowing the difference is part of what keeps you from either dismissing this topic entirely or taking every claim as settled fact. So consider this one filed under worth watching, not worth worrying about. If future research strengthens this connection, it may become another useful piece of the picture. For now, it simply reminds you that blood type touches more of your biology than most people realize, even in ways science hasn't fully mapped yet. And that brings everything together: the heart, the clotting, the cancers, even these broader immune patterns. All of it keeps pointing toward one underlying thread: blood vessels and how blood actually moves through your body. That thread leads directly to the single most surprising fact on this entire list. what your blood type may reveal about your brain. Fact number 7. Blood type, AB, and cognitive decline risk. We've arrived at the fact that surprised even the researchers who found it, the one this entire video has been quietly building toward. Researchers at the University of Vermont, led by Dr. Mary Cushman, drew on one of the largest stroke-related studies in the country called Regards, tracking more than 30,000 American adults aged 45 and older, followed for an average of 3.5 years. Buried inside that enormous dataset was something nobody had fully connected before. People with blood type AB, the rarest of the four, showed notably higher odds of developing measurable cognitive impairment. Problems with thinking, problems with memory, the kind of changes that quietly worry so many people as they move through their 50s, 60s, and 70s. The difference wasn't small. It came out to roughly 82% higher odds compared to people with other blood types. And that number held even after researchers accounted for age, race, sex, and region. So why would a blood type affect something as far removed from blood as memory itself? The researchers looked for an answer, and they found part of one. People with AB blood tend to carry higher average levels of a specific clotting-related protein called factor VIII. The same kind of clotting tendency you learned about earlier in this video. But here's the detail that made this finding so striking. That protein only explained a portion of the connection. Something else about blood type itself appeared to be influencing brain health beyond clotting alone. And if you think back to everything you've heard so far, this actually makes sense. Your heart and your brain don't operate in isolation from each other. They share the same network of blood vessels, the same circulation, the same vascular system carrying oxygen and nutrients throughout your body. A trait that affects your heart, as you learned earlier in this video, plausibly reaches your brain too, because in a very real sense, they're connected by the same rivers. Now, before this settles in the wrong way, hear exactly what the researchers themselves said. This is one study. Blood type is one factor among many, and it's far from the most powerful one. Blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar control matter enormously more, and unlike blood type, every one of them is something you can actually influence. The researchers were direct about this. There is no reason to panic over a blood type you were born with and can't change. So now you know what the research actually says. All 7 facts, heart to brain. The real question, the one that actually matters for your life, is what to do with it. That's where we go next. Here's the part that matters more than any statistic you just heard. Your blood type is fixed. It was decided before you were born, and nothing you do today will change the letter on that card. But here's the reframe worth holding on to. That's exactly why the things you can change deserve more of your attention, not less. Every single risk covered in this video, heart disease, clotting, certain cancers, even cognitive decline, is shaped far more by modifiable factors than by blood type alone. Blood type nudges the odds slightly. Your daily habits move them significantly. So what does that actually look like? Start with the numbers you can track, the same way you now think about blood type. Your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your blood sugar. These matter more than blood type ever will. And unlike blood type, you have real influence over every one of them. Knowing your own family history matters too. It fills in context no blood test alone can give you. Then there's movement. If clot risk rises with reduced mobility and long stretches of sitting, the response is straightforward. Build in regular movement, especially if long periods of sitting are part of your routine, whether that's travel, recovery from an injury, or simply a quieter season of life. Even short, consistent movement makes a real difference. Your eating pattern matters as well, not a diet built around your blood type, which, to be direct, isn't well supported by current evidence, but the broader patterns already backed by cardiovascular and cognitive health research, more whole foods, less processed food, consistent habits over time. And if you smoke, this is one of the clearest levers you have across nearly every risk this video has covered. Finally, don't overlook screenings. Staying current with the cancer screenings appropriate for your age isn't about fear. It's about catching something early enough that it stays manageable. Exactly the way the earlier facts about cancer risk in this video were meant to encourage. None of this changes based on your blood type. These actions matter for everyone. But if you happen to carry one of the blood types linked to higher risk in this video, think of these steps as slightly more worth prioritizing, not because you're in danger, but because you now understand exactly why they matter. Before we close, it's worth being clear about one more thing. When any of this is worth an actual conversation with a doctor, not just a video. One thing worth saying plainly: nothing in this video is meant to diagnose you, and your blood type should never be the reason you do or don't see a doctor. It's context, not a substitute for actual medical care. That said, some signs are worth acting on, regardless of what letter is on your blood type card, simply because they connect to what we've covered today. If you experience new or worsening chest pain, shortness of breath, or an irregular heartbeat that deserves prompt medical evaluation, not a wait-and-see approach. If you notice sudden swelling, warmth, or pain in your leg, particularly on one side, that can be a sign of a clot, and it's worth getting checked without delay. Unexplained weight loss, persistent digestive changes, or anything unusual like blood where it shouldn't be, these are worth bringing to a doctor's attention, even if they seem minor at first. And if you or people close to you notice memory or thinking changes that feel new, persistent, or are getting worse, especially if someone else points it out before you do, that's a conversation worth having with a healthcare professional sooner rather than later. In every one of these cases, the message is the same. Earlier evaluation generally means more options, not fewer. None of this is about waiting until you're certain something is wrong. And none of this is meant to leave you anxious about a number you were born with. If anything, it should leave you feeling the opposite. Think back to where we started, that letter tucked away on an old card in a drawer somewhere, a fact you probably hadn't thought about in years. It felt like trivia, something you'd only need in an emergency. It isn't trivia anymore. Not to you, not after this. What you've actually been given today isn't a diagnosis, and it isn't a prediction. It's context, the same kind of context as knowing your family history, or simply knowing your age. One more piece of a much larger picture, useful specifically because you now know how to use it, alongside the numbers you can actually change, not instead of them. That's really the heart of everything you've heard. Blood type is the one detail here you can't influence. Your blood pressure, your movement, your habits, your screenings, those you can. And now you understand exactly why they're worth the effort. So here's where that leaves you. You know one more thing about yourself than you did a few minutes ago. And more importantly, you know exactly what to do with it, track what matters, stay current with your checkups, and keep treating your body as something worth understanding, one piece at a time. Before you go, I'd genuinely like to know, do you know your blood type? Did any of these 7 facts surprise you the way they surprised the researchers who found them? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone.